Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Jeb Brooks, and I'd like to say we're very excited to have you with us this afternoon here for another in our series of 35-minute sales leadership webinars. This series is celebrating, our way of celebrating the Brooks Group's 35th year in the sales training business. I'd like to begin, of course, by welcoming all of you to the webinar today, but also especially our guest today, James Gurley. Now, James is the former Regional Chief Procurement Officer of a large publicly traded company, and he's agreed to share some what I think are really valuable insights into procurement for you and your sales team. So, James, welcome.
Thank you. And first of all, I would like to echo Jeb's welcome and say thanks for taking your time today. I know it's important, and hopefully the discussion will open up some thought processes for you that will help you to increase your sales by partnering more effectively with procurement. And so procurement is something I know a little bit about. I've been in the professional procurement business for about 26 years, and as Jeb mentioned, I've worked with some global companies, and I've also worked with a major university here in the U.S. So I guess the quick stats are that I've worked in 17 different countries. My last assignment, I was responsible for UK, Ireland, Middle East, Africa, and Turkey. And last 2 years of that particular assignment, I was responsible for leading a team of 61 to deliver more than 100 million euro in savings value for the company. So it was a pretty progressive, very strategic procurement organization. So, but it didn't start out that way, you know. And back in 1986, when I first began my career in procurement, our tools that we used in those days were a notepad and a pen, and a Rolodex was our database, or the yellow pages. Now, because of technology and because of procurement being a strategic part of an organization, completely different values, completely reasons, you know, why procurement is there, but also what procurement is doing. So hopefully some of our discussion today will enlighten some things or clarify some things, or just validate some things that you may have been thinking about or wondering about.
Well, and you know, obviously we've got the right guy on the line here with James, and I want to make a follow up on a point. If you have questions, go ahead and submit those. We'll answer as many as we can at the end of the webinar today, and any that we can't, we'll respond to on the Brooks Group's blog. So more on that later. But also, James and I have written a white paper together called Insight for Salespeople into Procurement, and by attending today's webinar, you're going to get an advanced copy of that white paper. But let's dive right in. And James, if you know, let's hit you right between the eyes and ask you, why does procurement exist?
Okay, that's a that's a very good question. Well, I guess a couple of things, right? So let's look at that a little bit. So. Most people think that procurement is all about savings, and for most organizations it is. It largely is, right? So there's a lot of debate on what are savings and what is the quality of the savings. But these days, I think especially in a tough economy, people struggle with sales. And so there's a couple of ways to affect the bottom line, right? How much you sell and how much you spend. So procurement is responsible for the how much you spend part. So if you look at things basically that in sales, if you sell something for $1, by the time you take out the overhead costs and things like this, it's about 40 cents of value. But when you save $1 in an organization, it's $1, right? So, and I'm just using a basic methodology here where it would be, you know, for example, old cost, new cost, X volume. So savings to an organization is really, really critical now, because it helps strengthen their bottom line. It helps them pay for things that maybe they did not budget for but now need, different things like that. So it's a strategic part of how organizations are managing their bottom line. The second thing is that, yeah.
James, I think that you know, the savings component makes a lot of sense, and you know, certainly that is a critical component. But as much as anything, the idea of the ethics compliance is something that I was just completely unaware of the critical role that you play there.
Yeah, well, good point as well. I mean, ethics and compliance in organizations are really important these days. In the Sarbanes-Oxley world, it's really critical, right? And some of these things are reputation and brand killers. I think if you're not if you're not careful with how you're managing your ethics and compliance. And by that I mean that with procurement and supplier selection, picking you, for example, as a sales company, there has to be a process that was fair, that was transparent, that that showed that you are being objective about how you make these decisions, because in the world we're in today, you have to produce this kind of transparency, particularly if you're in the public sector, government sorts of things, to prove that you are being fair, right? So some of the things around ethics that you raise are really important. I mean, look at Walmart and some of their current trouble that they're having right now. Procurement many times are the people who are responsible for ethics and governance and compliance around how the company is spending its money. Sometimes that's just in the form of a policy, and sometimes it's in the form of enforcement. So somewhere in there is balance.
Interesting. So given that context, I'll ask you another tough question, and a question that we've heard a lot, you and I, as we've been writing this white paper from directors of sales, VPs of sales, right on down to individual contributors, which is this: how can you avoid procurement altogether?
Yeah, I think that I've had a lot of experience with that, where over the years, people build relationships with their customer. For you as a salesperson, your customer many times is also my customer in the procurement organization, right? So what we have in common right away is we have the same customer, yeah. And so a lot of times, I find out sort of late about some a project or something like this that's going on that procurement could have been involved in, and it's because people avoided procurement. So sometimes if you're experiencing a delay or there's a real slowness, I think, of transactions with you, how your RFPs and things like this are going, a lot of it is because procurement was not involved early, right? So people tried to avoid procurement, and then procurement got involved. Why? Because procurement has a governance within many organizations. So I think that the Brooks Group did some polling that I don't know if you have that, Jeb, there, but I think it's really interesting numbers, because about 71% of the people that they polled have problems or are delayed by procurement in their transactions, right, with their customer base. That's a huge number. There was 12% that never have any problems with procurement, and I would tell you, if you're one of those 12% that don't have any problems with procurement, it probably means your customer is avoiding procurement. So it may not be an overall great plan for the future. I mean, a lot of companies over the last few years, as the economy has gotten a bit rougher, are switching from tactical procurement organizations to strategic procurement organizations. And so what worked last year might not work next year, and that's why the concept of understanding what procurement's doing and working to partner with them is really important, sort of, for the sustainability of your ability to sell to companies.
So if I extrapolate what you're saying, James, what really it boils down to is, unless you're selling to perhaps small businesses and some mid-sized businesses, you really just can't avoid procurement. It's, as James has described, even during the course of his career, but even beyond, we're seeing this strategic rise of procurement. And I think it's fair to say that anybody who's on the line today in a sales or sales leadership position can acknowledge the fact that procurement is playing more and more of a role for all of the reasons that James has highlighted. And I'm glad you brought up that data, James, because procurement is in some way seen as a deterrent or a delayer to the sales role, and in many ways it is. Again, for the reasons we outlined earlier, they're tasked with savings at the bottom line. They're tasked with ensuring compliance with ethical obligations and so forth. But a whopping, as you said, 71% of people that we polled are saying that they're facing procurement in a non-positive way. So they're either sometimes delayed or always slowed by procurement. So you keep talking, James, about the idea of partnership. So in your perspective, looking back on your career so far, you've obviously encountered some circumstances where salespeople have done this effectively. So what does it mean to partner with to partner with procurement?
Yeah, a great question. I think the answer is so amazingly simple. It's really good communication, right? So, partnering is like a bridge. It's a bridge that goes both ways, and I think what typically happens is that lots of times procurement, either internally or externally, is looked at as unilateral decision makers and not bilateral decision makers. And a bridge in partnership is what allows a procurement organization to really build relationships with key suppliers, strategic suppliers, people who are providing goods and services that are really critical to their ability to provide to their customers, and take those relationships and really build them into something that's sustainable and valuable. Maybe even go beyond price and start looking into a more holistic view of the relationship, right? But that would imply that it's an open dialogue. So as a supplier, as a salesperson, you have to be able to contribute to that partnership by maybe voicing opinions on, where sometimes maybe your customer is not really being a good customer, or looking at the holistic picture of your relationship. You have to have a voice where you can tell people, the way that we're working is costing me money. So at a certain point, you're going to have to figure out, is the customer a good customer or a bad customer? But if you figure out that they're a bad customer, or they're costing you money to do business with, but maybe they have a great name and gives you marquee value to go get other customers, taking the time and building that bridge, just having really good communication, is really critical, because there's probably a lot of things a procurement organization is opening to partnering with you that you might not know about until you begin that dialogue. So again, I'm just going back to the basics. We're talking about really good communication.
Well, and nothing you're saying is a surprise to anyone on the line, because they're the very skills and behaviors that are expected of a salesperson with their customer. So what I'm hearing you say, and let me make sure that I understand you properly, and I think I do, you're suggesting that it makes a lot of sense to look at your procurement relationship in much the same way that salespeople look at their relationship with the end user, or the final customer.
Right, and I guess you got to look at it from the perspective that your customer is my customer, and that's what we have in common, right? So if we're working together with the goal of giving them the best product or service at the whatever criteria is important, whether it's price or quality or all of the above, if we're working together, we have a much better chance of accomplishing, I would say, better value.
That's really an interesting point, and I think what you said there is critical. So if we look at the customer as we'll just for simplification say the end user of whatever product or service you're selling, that person in many companies, most companies now, needs to not only work with suppliers of that product or service, vendors, the salespeople there, but also with their internal procurement. And so very often they try to avoid that internally themselves. So as a salesperson or a sales organization, asking questions like, how do you go about making decisions like the one we're working on now? Or, how, if at all, should we engage with procurement? What role does procurement play in this kind of purchase? These kinds of very tactical questions are the ones that can make all the difference in terms of helping to facilitate that partnership.
In asking these kinds of questions, Jeb, you might actually open the door to helping them make a better relationship, the internal customer of procurement and your customer, your end customer. You might end up opening the door to helping them have a better relationship with procurement themselves, right? So, if they are the guys who are putting their head in the sand, they could see you as an opportunity to you facilitate the discussion with procurement on their behalf, right? So I think that's at least pushing the dialogue in the right direction.
And anecdotally, these kinds of questions, this kind of information has certainly made a difference, among our customers, our clients' relationships with procurement and with their clients. But also, I'm sure you've seen this kind of partnership make tremendous difference when you've been in various procurement roles throughout your career. Fair?
Yes, that's absolutely accurate.
So, we're talking about all this partnership, and we're getting along, and everybody's partnering successfully, and then great strides are made. Why then do salespeople and do their product offerings still get commoditized, James? What is this? Why is there this effort among procurement professionals to commoditize the offerings that we bring? I mean, after all, salespeople are trained to differentiate their offerings and to fight this commoditization. What's going on the other side there?
Okay, yeah, that's a really good question because, sometimes I'll just use the term category when I'm describing something, goods or services that people buy, and they feel that because it's such a generic term, they feel that it sort of strips away what might be individual or unique about that particular company. So in this particular case, there's really not a mystery, there's not an ulterior motive or really anything. Procurement organizations commoditize because procurement is based upon analytics, right? So a procurement organization has to look at the holistic picture, and I'll give an example. If you look at a big company, let's say a global company that I might have been working for, maybe they have $2 or $3 million worth of office supply spend, right? And we know that because we look at all the paid invoices that we have for office suppliers or people who are commoditized as office suppliers. And from that, we start to build a strategy. So a sourcing strategy then would start to look like, well, we have $3 million in spend, and of those, making up that $3 million, maybe it's 200 suppliers. So there's a huge opportunity here, right? Because if you reduce the amount of suppliers, you increase the leverage, right? You also probably dramatically reduce transactional costs and probably increase compliance. So it's all about making, creating the ability to look at what you have as an opportunity. I guess if you're a salesperson, you could think, well, I don't know if I like being commoditized, but if you were, let's say, for example, if there were 200 office suppliers of which you were one, and it got all boiled down into 3 suppliers providing the same $3 million, you'd probably really want to be one of those 3. And so from what the procurement organization is doing with commoditization is not taking any way, differentiation away. They're looking at things in an analytical way to drive value within the company. They have to follow a process, a sourcing process, because it has to be fair in how they do that, right? And so because of the analytical use of procurement organizations to find value, procurement tends to commoditize things.
And so that's a key takeaway there, and really a callback to the whole reason that procurement exists, which is compliance and ethics. Again, if as we've been writing this white paper, James and I have had the chance to talk to a lot of salespeople and as I said, sales leaders about this topic, and inevitably we ask the same question we asked James earlier: why does procurement exist? And typically the answers are things like to get in my way, to make me cut my price, or to leverage what I know and what I have against me to benefit my competitors. And it goes back to this 71% of people who have negative experiences with procurement. But what James is saying is that it's really all about following an auditable process, which is so critical in publicly traded companies, especially, and more so in privately held or smaller companies as well. And I think James is right. And in our experience, as we've done this kind of work with companies one-on-one, this is what we see. The more partnership you see with between sales and their procurement counterparts, the more effective the relationship becomes. I'll stick with James's metaphor there, or example, I guess, with the office supplies.
So, Jeb, if I could just add one more thing, though,
please.
Another example is to sort of, when I say fairness, right, you might be wondering fair for who, right? And so part of the fairness is fairness for the company that they represent, right? That's their job. But it's also fairness for the supplier, right? So you want to make sure that you are involved in, or that you have an opportunity to get that business. And when this commoditization takes place, a lot of times I use the word, it's to simplify how procurement is looking at things analytically. Procurement uses a lot of analytics tools these days, and maybe some of you have been asked to participate in opportunities that included e-auctioning platforms, maybe Ariba, maybe Taurus, things like this, and you're wondering, why are they sort of depersonalizing this? Why do I just go to a website or you know, some digital forum where I have to just put in my information in it, and it takes away everything that's special about me and my company? Well, the reason they're doing that is all about the analysis, right? I mean, another example I'll give you is in transportation. One of the companies I work for did a lot of third-party logistics transportation, and it could be that you have, you know, 500 lanes of logistics lanes, you know, that where you're buying trucking services, and of those 500 lanes, maybe they're being supported by 200 suppliers, right? So if you think of the analytical challenge of looking at that holistically, again, go step back a little bit and say procurement's looking at transportation spend at whatever it is, $10 million, and it's made up by X number of suppliers and X number of lanes. That's why they're asking you to use these kinds of tools, and that's why that commoditization is useful, because it facilitates a more apples-to-apples comparison. So it's really not about taking away anything that's special. It's about making sure that procurement is looking at things in an objective way.
Great point. Great point. So, you know, let's talk a little bit more about the relationship and ask you this. What do procurement professionals want from salespeople? What can salespeople give procurement that they're not getting now?
Well, I mean, some of it, I guess, if you look at that, back to that poll information, you know, where it says, you know, effectively 71% of people kind of are looking at procurement as maybe a roadblock or some way slowing down. So I guess what procurement really is looking for is respect for what they do, right? So that acknowledgement, same as sales, right, is that you want to feel that what you're doing is really important. Yeah, everybody needs to earn a living and all of this, but in the end of the day, having professional respect for people is really, really important. I spoke with somebody the other day that we mentioned the topic of procurement, and the woman said to me, yeah, I really hate procurement. They're the people who always tell me no. And so I thought about that, and I thought about how, from her perspective, the only time she engages procurement, she's had a really bad experience that I guess it wasn't an open conversation, and she just got told, no, you can't do that. So she didn't want to engage procurement, you know. So that respect is really important, and part of it is just respect, maybe partly based in understanding for what their goals and objectives are. But the number one thing with procurement is early involvement. It's the same thing that they have for their internal customer, who is your customer, yeah? Early involvement, because if you get involved in the process early, you can really do a lot more. You know, I've been involved in lots of processes where procurement was brought in so late that they basically just wanted procurement to rubber stamp the process to say that we went through procurement. And then that ends up being a delay because, you know, a professional procurement organization isn't going to accept that. They're going to go back and start at the beginning and create some sort of a sourcing process that they're going to follow for everybody. And so from that might be what some of these 71% are seeing as delays. It's because procurement wasn't involved early enough, and now they're having to redo some of the process, which is a constant problem. So I think that respect, the early involvement, recognition for what they do, policies and procedures, you know, some of this governance and compliance stuff, that's the stuff that keeps companies safe. That's the stuff that keeps them, you know, in terms of a regulatory perspective, in business. So it wouldn't do you any good to have a customer who goes out of business, right? So that's part of their job, is making sure that that they're following all of the rules and regulations. And also the thing is, you know, internal audit is an interesting player, and more so in companies where they are making sure that the outside scrutiny, you know, of how maybe a publicly traded company is really clear and transparent. And, you know, in company audits, many times they look at the supplier relationships and see that there aren't contracts, or there's some irregularities like that. And so I think what procurement wants is just acknowledgement that what they're trying to do is for the good of the company. And so for you as a salesperson, you should look at it that a company that's in business is a company that can give you business. And so procurement is a big part of how that sustainability works.
And recognizing them, you know, that procurement will play a role early may seem counterintuitive to some salespeople, because they think, oh, well, maybe we can slide this by procurement. But exactly what James said is so important, and we've seen it happen here. You know, we've seen it happen for our clients. It looks that way. You've got that internal customer, your end user, committed to your product or service. They're ready to sign up, ready to make it happen, and then procurement swoops in at the last minute and says, whoa, 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 whoa. We can't do
that's
this
an
quite
example
like
of where they, that's where your customer also just really hasn't involved procurement, right? So that's why this bridge, we go, think of that as that partnership. For you as a salesperson, you have a huge opportunity to help your customer work with procurement as well, right? So that's why it's a partnership.
So I want to go ahead and say, we've got a couple more points to make, but if you have questions, please don't hesitate to shoot those over to us in the chat window. We would welcome the chance to answer those at the end. We've already had a couple have come through, so we'll get to those in just a minute. But James, what about RFPs? How can our listeners do a better job of managing the RFP, RFQ, RFI, RF alphabet soup process?
Yeah, I think this is a standard way, obviously, of doing business. And sometimes people will get an RFP and they'll think, well, this is too cumbersome. I'm just not gonna give it. I'm not gonna submit. And so I think when you get invited to participate in an RFP, you should first look at it as, is this something that is good for my company? I mean, you should also look at the efforts it's going to take to facilitate, submitting that RFP and make sure that it's worthwhile commercially for you to do that. But there's some really simple things that you can do, and I'm going to state a little bit of the obvious, but as a procurement professional, I've seen this over and over and over again, is that there's some fundamental mistakes that people make all of the time. So one of the first things to do is to, you have to clarify things. Sometimes, you'll get an RFP and you'll wonder, or you'll see something that doesn't make sense. Procurement people make mistakes as well, and sometimes they may be figuring out a little bit of what they want through the RFP process. And so, if there's something that you're not sure about, you should ask. If you feel like that and you're asking, and the procurement group maybe has opened the forum for you to submit questions, that's a really good way to start the communication on an RFP. Most professional procurement organizations will do that. If they haven't done that, most would be open to that. If you said, hey, look, I've got some questions, all they'll do is they'll open it up to all of the suppliers so that it's fair. Yeah? Then they'll take those questions, consolidate answers, and post them for everybody to see. That's another way that, that people are using technology really to do, better communicating that way. So some of the simple things, I talked earlier about, communication, respect, and all of these sort of things that you learn in the sandbox. There's some things that are so basic and simple in how RFPs are done that are really, really simple. Maybe they're so simple that people forget to check them. So, I get RFPs all the time that have my name misspelled. So if you misspelled my last name, it doesn't make you look very interested in my business, right? I get RFPs, that are sent in unusual ways. I used to work for the shipping company DHL, and I used to get RFPs FedExed to me all the time, right? So it's just it's not being sort of aware of simple things. In my last role in the United Kingdom, I actually had an interesting role with sales, and what I did for them was, because the salesperson in DHL was ultimately going out to talk to their customers and try to sell them more of DHL services, and inevitably one of the guys that would be there would be the procurement guy from the company they were trying to sell to. What we did is we started having me look at or somebody on my team look at their proposals, right, when they were submitting a proposal, and I just tried to poke as many holes in it as possible. And that's where I saw over and over the same things. That people's names are misspelled. The addresses are the incorrect addresses. They're using 5 or 10 different fonts within the structure of the response. There's tons and tons of sales fluff, and I believe that everybody on the call really has faith in their companies, but you probably wouldn't be invited to an RFP if the procurement group didn't already know what you do. The RFP is an opportunity for you to tell them what the solution is to the problem they're presenting, right? So I'd say you have to be really succinct and try to avoid redundancy. Last thing I'll say is that the RFP is something that it can be fluid, right? So the first thing I would do is I would follow all of the rules. Follow all the rules that the procurement group is giving you. If they want this, give them that. But I would consider the opportunity to add an alternative option. If there really is something special or something you're aware of that could be valuable to them, that you think is something worth doing, I would submit everything in the RFP as requested, but then I would put an alternative option, or I would give them some free thinking, some innovation, I guess you could say. And that's something that I think a lot of procurement organizations would really welcome. In the end of the day, they're sort of in a vertical within their company, but you are selling to many companies. So if you have seen something great done somewhere else that you think might benefit this company that you're submitting an RFP for, share it with them. You know, I once heard the expression that creativity is the ability to forget where you last heard or saw something. And I really believe that that's the case. So be creative, and the worst they can do is, if they're not interested, is simply ignore it, as long as you have fulfilled the obligation of the part that they are that they're requesting. So I would say be creative.
And James, I really do think that that piece right there is a real gem out of this webinar, this white paper, the alternative option. By including that, you're able to exercise some good creativity and show your innovation, which without a doubt procurement, who are, as you said, in that vertical, appreciate. People appreciate innovation, especially when they aren't as familiar with your offering as you are. It's your opportunity to frame the discussion in many ways. So with that, I do want to open it up to questions. So we've gotten a couple submitted. Again, if you have some, don't hesitate to put them in that chat box there on the webinar, and we will be happy to answer those. The first one we've got here is, well, actually, it's just on this alternative option component here, James. What about the risk of them stealing our idea from an RFP?
Okay.
And there's one right above that I do want to clarify. Somebody's asking us to elaborate on RFP, so we're talking about a request for proposal. So what about the risk of somebody stealing our idea in our request for proposal response?
Yeah, a couple of things. I chuckle at that a little bit because it's pretty common, right? And that's why I mentioned the thought about creativity being the ability to forget where you heard or last saw something. So from that perspective, there's nothing really original. However, for you as a salesperson, there could be something that you or your company is doing or offering or has knowledge of that is innovative, right? That is something that can be really, really valuable, an idea that you have for them. And so I would say, from my perspective, most RFPs that you're gonna be asked to participate in are going to have a non-disclosure agreement. I would just make sure that your legal group has a look at that, and even if it's to put in one sentence, add one sentence that makes it mutual, right, for the non-disclosure to go both ways. Then that procurement organization, if they're a professional organization, they have a ethical obligation to not share that information with anybody. Doesn't mean they're not going to just take that idea and flip it into a second RFP, but if you have a non-disclosure agreement, they really can't, take your idea and do something with it.
Great, great tip there. We have time for one more quick question here, and it may not be a quick question, but we'll take a stab at it. It's a question for relative to timeliness. James, what tips do you have to help to provide some sense of urgency around timeliness that sales has? We're focused on getting through the month, the quarter, the fiscal year close. How do we build that in for procurement, if at all?
Well, I think a lot of this just goes back to relationships, right? So I think if you have really good relationships with procurement people, then it's a conversation. I've had lots of people over the years that, will come to me at different times of the year and say, we're working on this, and I might be able to do a little bit better if I can do it within this time frame. Or I know you guys have maybe whatever you have budgeted to buy, 2,000 laptops, and I can do a little bit better right now than I can in 3 weeks. So it's communication, I think. And the second thing is that it goes right back to early involvement, right? So if you know something's going to happen, you have the opportunity to facilitate better timing for it to happen, and I really strongly believe that. And a lot of this is based on relationships. And in my last role, I tried to be as good of a communicator as I could, and that's the way I tried to build credibility with my customer, which would be for you as a salesperson, your customer. Yeah, that's what we have in common. And after a reasonably short period of time, I found myself invited to join 4 different management boards. And in those management boards, including one that was in operations, sitting at the table there as a procurement guy, I got to hear all of the ideas and strategies and goals and objectives that the company had. And as a procurement guy, I was able to think of how can I influence that in a positive way? What can I do to contribute to that? And in some cases, it would be something that I could also share with suppliers. Where I knew we were going to do something, I could immediately start talking to my supply base and start trying to tee things up so that both the timing and the value would align.
It's all about partnership. And with that, I want to say thank you very much, James. It's been a pleasure to have you. And if any of our listeners are interested in more discussion around this, in addition to our procurement training program that we have, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. The contact information is here on the slide. And of course, keep your eye out for the white paper. And James and I certainly do appreciate you taking the time to join us. We wish you happy selling and best of luck partnering with procurement. Again, thank you, James, and thank you, everyone on the line. Goodbye.